personal God. He speaks personally. Amen. Last week you might have begun to hear the book of Esther in a way that you've never heard it preached before. We're going to continue along with Esther. I want to look at a couple other layers of what's going on. We've got, in the first couple of chapters of Esther, we've got 3 layers going on that we got to talk about one of them last week. I consider them to be the layers of delusion, counterfeit, and war. It's wrapped up in such a nice little story. We talked about delusion last week. We used that idea. I try to use whatever human means I can to describe things that we can understand it. And I started out with just describing the world building, the setting the rules of the world that we're dealing with. And I compared that to your fantasy or science fiction knowledge, just because you got to understand the rules that you're playing by. You know, there's nothing worse than going out and watching a monster movie and they spend the first half of the movie showing you how the monster is bulletproof, and then the very end it gets defeated by being shot. You know, you just hate it when it just like breaks its own rules, right? Anyway, so the first chapter of Esther is laying that groundwork, is laying the rules for the pagan kingdom that they're in and what they're going to have to deal with. And it was established very strong, very securely, that the law of the land is final, that not even the king can change the law of the land. And so much so that the king loses his wife because of the law. The king then looks out for another wife, and then Esther becomes queen, and Haman rises up and is given the permission, the hand of the king to be able to write law, and writes the law that all the Jews would be killed. And somehow still, after all of the laws that were demonstrated to be solid, that cannot be broken, for some reason Esther still believed that even though she was a Jew and the law was that all Jews were to be killed, somehow she would not be killed. That somehow the law that was unbreakable would be broken for her. That she would escape the judgment that was right in front of her for no other reason than she just believed she was special. No, for no other reason to know that, well, I'm the queen, so surely the law can't come down on the queen. When the only reason she is the queen is because the law came down on the previous queen. That there was an intense delusion going on of the I'm special. The intense delusion of judgment can never happen to me. That I can sin as much as I want and consequences will never happen. That I can live this life how I want, and I can stand up before the throne on Judgment Day, and somehow I am not going to be judged there by myself. Everyone else is going to be judged by their sin or the blood of Jesus. I'm going to be judged righteous on my own merits. No matter what has been taught, no matter what the reality is, there's something special about me that exempts me from having to deal with reality. We have delusion. And so we want to look a little bit beyond delusion today and look at counterfeit, and then if we are given enough time, we will look at war, because that's what's going on in the first 4 chapters of Esther. So let's start in chapter 2. After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus was appeased, he remembered Vashti and what he had done, and what was decreed against her. Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, Let there be fair young virgins sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom. They may gather together all the fair virgins to Shushan the palace, to the house of the women, unto the custody of Ahijah the king's chamberlain, keeper of the women, and let their things for purification be given them, And let the maiden which pleaseth the king be queen instead of Vashti. And the thing pleased the king, and so he did. And so then we have this year-long search for a wife. And so enter our main characters. It's taken us this long, we finally get to our main characters. Now in Shushan, the place where there was a certain Jew, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimi, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. And we'll get back to his lineage in a bit. Who had been carried away from Jerusalem with a captivity which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. So we've got this description. If we know that, as we looked at last week of Psalm 137, the reality that if they're still in Babylon, they're still in Persia at this time, that means they've purposely hung up their harps on the willows and have purposely not just decided not to sing anymore, but actually forgotten how. And we can go into Ezra, which would be a book that's before this chronologically, and we find out in chapter 2 that there's somebody named Mordecai there. So we have two options. I'll just present the two options. One is that there are two Mordecais. That's possible, because we're not given lineage in Ezra. The other option is that Mordecai left Persia, went to Jerusalem, looked around and go, wow, stuff is tough here. The temple's not getting built as much as I thought it was. There's really not a whole lot going on here for me in the place where God is. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to see what best life I can live in Persia. And he left Jerusalem and came back. Those are our two options. Either way, he's in Persia by choice. He's there living his life in the world apart from the will of God, apart from the presence of God by choice. And here he is taking care of his younger cousin, must be a much younger cousin. But here he is taking care of Esther. And I'm just going to skip ahead just a second, just read what is expected. So all of the women would go and they would be taken unto the one who would be in charge of taking care of the virgins. And then this would happen. So verse 12 is, now when every maid's turn was come to go to King Ahasuerus, after that she had been 12 months, according to the manner of women. So they would go in and they would stay underneath the rule of Hege, however you pronounce that, Hege, and they would, and he would be making sure they were purified 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with sweet odors and other things. So a year-long spa trip of just being pampered. Now, and every maid's turn was come to go into the king, after she had been 12 months according to the manner of women. For so were the days of their purification accomplished, to wit, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with sweet odors, and with other things for the purifying of the women. Then came every maiden unto the king. Whatsoever she desired was given her to go with her out of the house of the women unto the king's house. In the evening she went, and on the morrow she returned unto the second house of the women, to the custody of Shaashgaz, the king's chamberlain, which kept the king's concubines. She came in unto the king no more, except the king delighted in her, and that she were called by name. And I was going through all of this because this is completely foreign to Israel's way of life. So it's setting up the rules of the world, because this is a foreign pagan kingdom. We've got no idea how this operates. So to simplify this, she had to leave Mordecai for a year to go through all of these treatments. And then when it was her turn, she would leave the women's house, go to the king, spend the night with the king, and then go and live with the rest of the concubines. And he's doing this with all of the maidens of the land, having a night with each woman, and considering them to be, how do they say it, lesser wives. So he's basically marrying every maiden in the nation and calling them lesser wives. They would go and have their one night with the king and then be separated into the house of the concubines until he finds the one woman that pleases him the most. And that concubine, he's going to give the title of queen, and she would just basically be the special head concubine with the title of queen. And so that's what's going on. That is the structure of what Esther is going to be expected to be a part of. This is why I mentioned last week that this is the point where she should have stood up and said no. Because I want you, we compared last week Psalm 137 before getting into here, so we could see the hearts of the people before God and what choice they were making in order to even be here. All right. But now we're getting into marriage territory. Now we're getting into wife territory. So if we're going to compare this, we got to compare it to Proverbs 31. So let's go and look at it. Proverbs 31 describes, and just read the description, a mutual satisfaction commitment between a husband and a wife. It describes the heart of the husband is trusted, and the wife is trusted with the heart of the man. There's a mutual commitment, there's a mutual appreciation, there's a mutual satisfaction and a support, loving care of each other. She does good to her husband, diligent in provision and nourishing her household, diligent in business. She adds to herself strength. She is charitable, secure in times of need due to the self-awareness of her level of provision. You're going to her level, her business, her strength, her provision. Isn't the husband supposed to be providing all these things? Well, of course, they're working together. They've got the same household, and they're both mutually building up because it's both theirs. And we're talking about how the wife handles the husband, and other parts of Scripture we see how the husband handles the wife, but we're mutually working on a household here. So she's secure in times of need due to her level of self-awareness of her own level of provision. She knows that she can be warm during the snow because she knows how she's already prepared to enter into it. She treats herself like a queen. She wears silk. Not only does she treat herself like a queen, and not only does she have her own business inside of the household, but she has a business outside of the household that is run for the purpose of lifting up and building up the position of all those around her. Not only does she clothe herself in tapestry and fine silk, but she makes and sells fine linen so everybody else can be raised up with her. Her husband sits in honor in the community. He's known in the gates among the elders. He's known for his wisdom and his presence and his involvement. She speaks wisdom and kindness, and she is praised by both her husband and her children. Now, this is a description of a good woman, a good wife. It's also a description of the church, as the church is the bride of Christ. This is a description of the character and everything that is supposed to embody a woman. This is womanhood right here. Diligence, provision, nourishing, lifting up those around her, recognizing the love that's been set upon her in a mutual submission with her husband, raising up everybody around her with both passion, wisdom, and strength. And here, Esther is valued because she's pretty. Can we see a difference going on between these things? That Esther is valued because she's pretty. There's nothing wrong with being pretty. Pretty is great. I'm sure the Proverbs 31 woman was beautiful. But if you notice, in all of Proverbs 31, her beauty is not what she's primarily praised for. It's not what she's known for, and it's not what she's looked to for. It's her character and her actions and her level of commitment and passion for her husband that drives her and is what she's known by. And so we have our first counterfeit. We have our first description of the position of a wife that she spends an entire year working on the outside to make sure that she is visibly and sexually appreciated by her future husband. And that is the extent of her value. As far as this system goes, that is the extent of her value to the king, about whether she is visually and sexually pleasing to him, if she would catch her favor. And that is how the first counterfeit that gets lost. Both, oh man, how hard is it, even in today's day and age, to get across the idea of being a godly woman and just dealing with the issue of modesty. Yes. All right? Have you noticed we didn't talk about modesty at all in Proverbs 31? It's so foundational that it's almost not even mentioned, other than she wears silk. Wearing silk and Tabernacle, that's the closest we get to what's being married. The very basic thing of how a woman would treat herself and present herself to others is the hardest beginning place that we have now. Just the general idea of modesty, as if the whole concept of femininity and the whole concept, and I'm not just picking on women, this is the church, the whole concept of how we are presented and what our purpose is to be attractive, pleasing, and provide something of benefit to others. That is designed to be built up in a way so that we can be taken from. To be objects of lust and objects of desire that are actually able to fulfill the lust and desire that we are objects of. And that being the height of femininity in the world. That being the height of spirituality in the world. What philosophy, what theology can I mine to make my world better, to ease my suffering in those times when I've been out at work or been out at war and I'm all sore and beat up. I just want to come back in and I want somebody to pamper me. What's the best looking, best acting one that I can take from in order to be used for my own benefit? And that's the height of what the world sees as feminine. That's the height of the way the world will deal with the woman, no matter how much the idea of feminism is raised. There is no stronger woman than the Proverbs 31 woman compared to any of the feminists in the world today. As much as they would say woman power and all of these things, doesn't even come close to the strength that it takes to become this Proverbs 31 woman. It takes the love of a good woman and the love of a good man working together towards that common end, towards that common goal. So here we have somebody who is purposefully outside of the will and the presence of God, who is called to be everything we just read described through Proverbs 31. She's designed to have a husband that she has a mutual satisfaction and commitment with, that it just starts there. She's designed to do good. Here in this setup, she's supposed to spend her first night with the king, go back to the house of the concubines, and never see the king again unless he calls her. Whenever he happens to want her, he will call for her, and she will come and have their night, and then he will send her back away, and if he happens to ever want to see her again, he will then call her later. And if you remember from the part of the story we read last time, when Mordecai was like going to the king and talk to him about this problem for us, she's like, he hasn't called me in the past 30 days. It's been an entire month and he hasn't even wanted to see me. I've not been called in there yet. The whole idea is whenever the king wanted some satisfaction, the queen is the one that he went and took it from. And if he's not in the mood for that sort of satisfaction or not wanting her, she might as well not even exist. That's what the church has become. That's what it's become, this thing where if somebody needs a little bit of help, they need a little bit of business help, they need a little bit of help finding a spouse, they need a little bit of counseling, they need to find some morals again, they need to get right with God and appease some guilt, they need some sort of structure, they need some sort of something, they come to the church to get what they need from it. All the while, the church never actually providing the backbone, the sustenance of what it was designed to be in the first place. We've accepted a counterfeit position. And how much has it stolen from us? How much of your virtue, how much of your strength, how much of your character is just not even seen by the world anymore, just hidden away? That if you have that in those 30 days that you haven't been with the king, that's fine. You do you. Remember, the law of the land is what works for you is good for you. If you want to do something, you do it. If you don't want to do something, you don't have to do it. But you live your life to the fullest, and you just do it in a way that makes sure that they can get what they want from you. Oh, it goes so much deeper than modesty. Raising a young lady goes so much deeper than just modesty. It goes so much deeper than just behavior. I appreciate the testimonies, but part of me just really wants to just never hear the phrase doing it right or doing it wrong ever again in any testimony ever, because we should be so far beyond that it's not even a part of our testimony anymore, because it's so foundational. Oh, I used to be caught up in doing it right or doing it wrong. That's so shallow a level of theology, spirituality, and faith that overcoming it should be like, wow, God rescued me from this puddle after having rescued me from this ocean. And I celebrate having been rescued out of the puddle instead of having been rescued out of the ocean. And we need to get back to the God who rescues, not the God who just deals with your little moral conundrums. The counterfeit just happens. And so she goes along with the counterfeit. We get to verse 15. Now in the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, was come to go in unto the king. She required nothing but what Hegai, the king's chamberlain and the keeper of the women, appointed. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. Because the best that the church has to offer is better than anything the world has to offer. What the joy of the Lord provides, the countenance the Lord provides, the peace the Lord provides, it's better than anything out there in the world. The world looks at what's in the church and just wants to be a part of it. But can't think of another example right now, but just like Mike Pence in the middle of the Me Too movement won't even be in public with a woman that's not his wife. He would be celebrated for the fact that he has no Me Too things against him, but mocked for the reason why. They want the result, but not the method. They would want the result, but not the source. They want to see what you have and take it from you, to use it to their own advantage as much as possible. So Esther obtained favor in the sight of all of them that looked upon her. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his house royal in the 10th month, which is in the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. All this started in the 3rd year of his reign. So basically for the past 4 years, he's been away at war while all of his people have gotten all these women ready for him. He's come back from war and he's ready to pick out his wife. And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And in the world we're going, she finally made it. She was recognized. No, she's been given the highest honor because she was the queen already, and he just finally recognized her inner light. Until we go back to our Proverbs 31, and we remember favor is deceitful and beauty is vain. But a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. Yeah. And here she is, favor. And in the back of her mind is never, this is deceitful. All she gets is the favor. And people want the favor. They want to be appreciated. They want to be valued. They want to know that when they talk about their faith, it's going to be with those who appreciate it and value it and never challenge it. And it's never going to be an iron sharpening iron, and it's never going to be an evangelism. It's just going to be the spiritual spa day, where of those that I'm comfortable with, and that's going to appease me and make me feel better. We just want that favor. But the woman that fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Oh, you heard that cry going out this morning about being in a church that fears the Lord. And the king made a great feast unto all his princes and his servants, even Esther's feast. And he made a release to the provinces and gave gifts according to the state of the king. Because you know how, as a king, you know how to make your subjects love you. You forgive all the taxes that are due. You give them food, and you forgive the taxes, and everyone will love you. That's what he did. And so we see Esther's compromise. We see her counterfeit. And now we begin to see Mordecai's. Verse 19, and when the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai sat in the king's gate. King's gate, I think it's interesting that this entire palace and all of that has been excavated over the past 100-something years in archaeology, and they found it. It wasn't until, I think it was 1970, that they actually found the King's Gate. And King's Gate, I believe, was like 130 by 100 feet. I mean, the thing's huge. Anyway. But if you remember our Proverbs 31 description of the husband sits in honor in the community. He's known, he sits in the gates among the elders. Because in Jerusalem, where the gates were, that's where the elders would sit. That's where the judges would sit. That's where teaching would happen. That's where counseling would happen. That's where wisdom would be given. That's where all the markets happen. But we're not in Jerusalem anymore. Mordecai's acting like he is. He's acting like he can live in the world just the way he would live under the will of God and still have the same position, have the same honor and respect, and it almost like it doesn't matter that he's outside of the will of God. He can be just as righteous outside of the will of God as he can be inside of the will of God. It doesn't have to be God's gates. It can be any old gates. He can just go sit in any old gates, and he should be revered as a man of God anywhere he goes, even though he's in a place that has nothing to do with God. He should still somehow be respected as the man of God. He goes and sits in the King's Gate. Of course, he couldn't even get the job of being in the King's Gate had Esther not been the queen. Some of the verses that we skipped when Esther was taken to I don't know how to pronounce that, Hegai. When she's taken there, then he spent his time just sort of pacing outside the window beside the room of the women, and now he's made it. He's in the King's Gate. He's got his professor position. He's now respected in the community, sitting at the King's Gate. It could be part of the King's Guard. There's a lot of possibilities that this could have been. But we know it's the counterfeit version of sitting at the gate in Jerusalem. He's either a guard of the king, he's taking care of the court of the king, he's a doorkeeper. There's a list of possibilities of jobs that he could be doing that are not honored elder, wise man of God teaching the younger generation, although that's what the position sounds like to him. It's a counterfeit. He doesn't have to teach the wisdom of God. He can just be as close to the king as possible and keep his eye on Esther while holding a position of medium respect. He's not one of the princes that has the ear of the king, but he's in the palace. Esther had not yet showed her kindred nor her people as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther did the commandment of Mordecai, like as when she was brought up by him. Because if there's one thing that's going to ruin all of this, one thing that's going to break the favor, one thing that's going to take him away from the king's gate, one of the things that's just going to ruin all of this illusion is mentioning the blood and sin and judgment. If there's one thing that will ruin the illusion of this counterfeit gospel, this counterfeit church that's just there to be used, is dealing with sin, dealing with the cross, dealing with the entire reason Jesus came. That's what had to be sacrificed when it describes Psalms 137, and they hung their willows and they forgot how to play and their tongues cleaved to the roof of their mouth. They had nothing to give anymore. They gave away the very essence of the faith and now just had this counterfeit shell of worthlessness, but saying themselves, trying to look like they had everything. And something happens. Verse 21, in those days Mordecai sat in the king's gate. Two of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those which kept the door, were wroth and sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. And the thing was known unto Mordecai, who told it to Esther the queen, and Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. And when inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out. Therefore they were both hanged on a tree, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. So all his position as king's gate, he can't even warn the king himself. He has to go to Esther, and Esther warns him. And at this point, Mordecai should have gotten praised. He should have gotten rewarded. He just saved the life of the king, and he's overlooked. And so we are introduced to our next character. After all these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. So here we have some people who have a counterfeit faith, a counterfeit gospel. They have no judgment of the Lord. They have no promise. They have no song, but they have position. They have no character. No, they have no Proverbs 31 character, but they have the favor of the world. They're no longer doing the work of the ministry, but they're letting the testimony of God make them into something that is usable by the world. They've lost their authority. They've lost all the righteousness underneath the will of God, purposefully chosen against it. And so we have our counterfeit, and then we get our war. And most of you know the book of Esther. We go, okay, so the war starts later. No, the war started in verse 1 of chapter 3. After these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. Okay, so now we got to go back to lineage. We got to actually see what's going on here. All right, so verse 5 of chapter 2. Now in Shushan the palace there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimi, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. I don't know if this lineage is recognized by anybody, but this is the family of King Saul. King Saul was the son of Kish, a Benjamite. Shimi would have been his relative, so it's not direct lineage of Saul, but same family. And so King Saul was set up, and I guess before we do that, we got to go way back further in history. All right, so let's jump way back further in history, all the way to Jacob and Esau. We know all that story. Esau despised the birthright, which was a description of him, the birthright being his ability to be the priest of the household. All right, so he was set up to be the minister of God in the house, and he rejected it for earthly gain. And so because he despised the role of the priesthood, he was hated by God. All right? And all of the practical history between Esau and Jacob happened. And you can imagine, just imagine, probably don't have to imagine, this happens in church, families in the church all across America, maybe even in yours, that when that pastor just said something that you hated, and you go home and you have a pastor for lunch, and you're just tearing him down. Imagine that was Esau's life. He would go home. You can just imagine what it was like around the dinner table. With Esau complaining about that bastard Jacob who did all this to him, who stole this from him, how he lied to his father and stole his birthright. All of these things, you can just imagine all of the hostility from Esau towards Jacob just around the family dinner table. And that is how a person named Amalek was raised. It was the next generation hearing all of the complaints of Esau against Jacob and against the God of Jacob and how he was cast out, and Jacob got the blessing of God and he got nothing, he got hated, and all of these other things. And so Amalek grew up hating Jacob and the entire lineage. And then you fast forward, and the Israelites are in Egypt, and then God removes them out of Egypt, and they have their time getting the law, and they're God's people, and they move on. They're going towards a promised land, and then the Amalekites come and fight them. And just remember that happened. We'll come back to it. And so they had that battle, and they move on. And so because of that, because they fought that, because Amalek came and made war against the Israelites on their way to the promised land, God told Saul to wipe them out. And so Saul starts fighting him, and he refuses to kill the king, King Agag. Amen. It is an Agagite. All right. So he refuses to kill the king, and and then the prophet at the time kills King Agag, and the blessing of God left Saul and went to David. And you all remember all of that story and that history. Well, Shimi is the one that in the middle of all of the battles cursed David, because David had the audacity to take over and kill Saul's family. So Shimi was an anti-Davidite. Let me describe it that way. He was anti-David. So that's the lineage of Mordecai, is the lineage of Saul against David. All right. And the lineage of Haman is the lineage of the Amalekites following the king who Saul refused to kill. So the sin that Saul refused to deal with has now come back, is now back in the picture. All right? But it's a little deeper than that. All right? So if you go to all of, we're going to back up a minute. I skipped a step. All right? Mordecai sitting on the fence. I just want to get this description out there for you. Do you know all of the Jewish theology that is known today, practically speaking? If you were to go to any synagogue, if you were to go study any Judaism, any modern Judaism, whether it is the occultic Kabbalah all the way to the very Orthodox, the entire spectrum, all of that theology is based in the theological workings of the people who lived in Persia at this time. It didn't come out of the temple. It didn't come out of Jerusalem. It came out of Persia. The 15 million people that are here, all of the theological study and re-examination of all of the Moses texts that happened while they were in Persia is the foundation of all of the modern theology we have today that came outside of the will of God. That's counterfeit. All right? So here we are. They're in the middle of doing all of that. And Esther's accepting counterfeit. The people are accepting counterfeit. They have no need for the will of the presence of God. And so this is the understanding of the spiritual influence of Amalek. Just read it. They explain that Amalek represents the pinnacle of evil, the ability to know God and intentionally rebel. Yeah. He is cynically scoffs at every reason to do good, sowing doubt and confusion. He's known as the constant doubter with a purpose. And this is the purpose that we need to deal with today, because this purpose that Amalek has is most successful in a church that has accepted and living in counterfeit. Brazenly rushing to any sign of passion for holiness with the purpose to cool it down. That is the purpose. Remember the war that they had just left Egypt, and they had just they were the people of God on their way to the promised land. And Amalek was there to bring them down a peg or two, just to make sure that they knew they weren't the hot stuff that they thought they were. So they bring in that maybe this trip to the promised land isn't going to be the provision that God had promised them. Maybe God's promise wasn't quite as good as it was made out to be, and we have to take some time for contemplation and doubting what God said, and not for the purpose of sowing doubt, but for the purpose of cooling off the holiness, for the purpose of a people who are driven in passion before the Lord to just back up and slow and cool off a little bit and still be able to have the things of God, but we don't need that passion driving stuff. We need the cooler heads will prevail. And we need to go through, we need to understand, we need to have our own version of peace and forget that holiness and that drive towards holiness. Just be the people of God without that, and you'll be fine. And so here we are at a time of the most accepting of all of the counterfeit that the world has to offer, and the rejection of all of the righteousness that God expects and provides. And remember that whole idea of love that He set upon us so that we can love others. And so He set upon, in judgment, 70 years to bring their hearts back. And then at the end of the 70 years, some of the hearts were sort of turned back, and the other ones were just fine to stay where they were. Oh, that passion, that zeal, that holiness, that inner song, that's not as important as a secure and comfortable life and being recognized and being highly favored. Oh, isn't that you go to women's conferences all the way and we go, oh, you blessed and highly favored. That's what we want. We want to be recognized for how good and beautiful and perfect God has allowed us to present ourselves as. Because we are such a blessing to the world, don't you know? If it wasn't for just the blessing of the church, there just would be just the darkness in the world. And you just need the good light shining on the hill so that everybody can be encouraged to know that God is up there watching. Counterfeit. Counterfeit. No holiness, no righteousness, just all for me. Just accolades for me. And let's forget about the fact that me celebrating my accolades is just me being set up to be used and abused and taken from by you. As if that's the purpose of everything. For me to just be the best thing to be stolen from. So here he is. At the middle of all this counterfeit, when, oh, and by the way, this book is still about providence. God works all things out for the end of His promise, whether you're in sin or not. It's our sin to take God's providence as verification of what we're doing as being good. No, God uses us and our sin to bring about His end. The question is, are you going to rise up in passionate, holy zeal for Him? All these things the king hurries promote Haman, the son of, right after he saves the life of the king. He actually did a good thing in saving the life of the king. And then all of a sudden the power gets transferred to his enemy that is solely there to limit his holiness, to limit his passion, to limit his zeal. Because as long as he's there to take care of Esther, it's all good. As soon as he rises up as a man of God, it's unacceptable. So all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king has so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence. Then the king's servants, which were at the king's gate, said unto Mordecai, Why transgressest thou the king's commandment? Don't you know the rules of the world? You break the king's rules, you die. Why are you doing this? Now it comes to pass, when they spake daily unto him, that he hearkened not unto them, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's matter would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. He finally let him know why. But if we were to go back in the Hebrew, this is almost a word-for-word description of that time when Joseph was in Egypt and Potiphar's wife kept trying to draw him in to satisfy her lust to sleep with him, that she tried over and over to break him down. That's the language here. They tried over and over again to break him down, to accept the counterfeit, to finally just back off of his holiness. Because remember, that's the entire purpose of an Amalekite. That's the entire purpose of Agag, to see the righteousness of God and diminish it, and to take it to lukewarm, so it's not worth anything. And so that's what he does. He keeps rebuffing him, trying to see if this holiness thing is actually going to stand. Well, church, is it? Is this holiness thing going to stand? Is this passion, is righteous zeal of God going to stand, or is it just a little bump in the road in your accepting of the counterfeit, of your appreciation of the counterfeit? And when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, then was Haman full of wrath. We'll jump up a little bit. We've got Haman full of wrath that he's not being bowed down to. And so he convinces the king, he bribes the king. He says, if you will give me so much money to pay everybody else to kill all of the Jews, then you're going to get to collect all of the money that the Jews have. He basically bribes the king and tells him it's in his best interest to get rid of all these people that don't follow his laws, and gets the law that they're going to be killed, and casts lots to find out what day it's going to happen. After they cast lots to find out what day it's going to happen, they sent notices far and wide in the 127 provinces, all up and down the east, nailing the paper on the town square, nailing the new law, saying that on the 14th of Adar, all the Jews are going to be killed, and there was weeping and gnashing of teeth all throughout the nation. We get to chapter 4. When Mordecai perceived all that was done, Mordecai rent his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city, and cried with a loud and bitter cry, and came even before the king's gate, for none might enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. Because while the law of the land was, you do what you want, you live your best life now, the most satisfying, the worst that you can possibly do in that type of thing is bring somebody else down, to rain on somebody else's parade, to dare to bring judgment and lamentation and mourning and woe, to dare to bring up the word of God and cry judgment is coming, and oh God, rescue. How dare the truest evil in the world to make somebody feel bad. So he's not even allowed in the king's gate anymore. In every province whatsoever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting and weeping and wailing, and many laying sackcloth and ashes. So Esther's maids and her chamberlains came out and told it her. And the queen was exceedingly grieved. Because of the law? No. Because Mordecai was grieving. And she sent raiment to clothe Mordecai and to take away his sackcloth from him. But he received it not. All right. So what spirit is she under at the moment? We finally got some zeal and passion out of Mordecai. We finally got some zeal and passion out of the rest of the Jews in the area. We finally got a description of, oh God, we need your presence. Yeah. We finally not only got that on the inside knowledge thing, but it's driving, it's on the outside. You take one look at somebody, and if they're in sackcloth and ashes, you know something's going on. This is a full outside zeal, passion issue that's going on. And what's the first thing she wants to do? Calm that holiness down. Slow it down. Oh, you're a little too hot. Just get a little bit more lukewarm. You don't have to get cold. You don't have to be cold. I'm not going to take your faith away from you. You can still believe it. Just back it down a few notches. Just slow down. Just don't be so out there. You're going to ruin everybody else's life. You're going to ruin this whole... Remember, I'm the queen. The last queen who refused to go in the king's presence got kicked out. And now, if they find out that I'm a Jew, then he's not going to want me anymore, and I'm just going to be stuck in the concubine house for the rest of my life. And what's going to become of me? You got to calm down. We've got a good thing going here, Mordecai. We just got to go with the flow. The delusion comes in as if it's not going to apply to her. Remember that in the first level? The counterfeit of believing actually what they have in this world being actually valuable and actually anything close to the design of God, as if there's nothing better for them in Jerusalem. There's nothing, Proverbs 31, oh, that's a pipe dream. That's not really for me. That's just way too much work. No, I'd rather be, it took me a year of pampering to get where I'm at now. Imagine how much pampering was in the months between the times that she was called into the king's house. What kind of a life of ease do you think this was, of not being required to actually care about anything? Not being required to actually put time, effort, and energy into building, growing, and taking care of anything. Rather just being the one who expects everybody else to take care of you. Because you just got your poor, pathetic little self that needs to be taken care of so that you can maintain the favor that you've always known. How much was it risk compared to her life? Compared to that, what is her life? She'd gladly give her life just to keep this level of comfort. Got to calm down. Who needs Haman when you have Esther? Just calm down, Mordecai. It's not that bad. Don't grieve. And called Esther, and then Esther and him are having to do this telephone game because they're not actually allowed to talk to each other. So they're passing messages. So it takes a few back and forth messages. And so we get back down to verse 13. Then Mordecai commanded to Esther, commanded. What a word. Think not with thyself that thou shalt escape the king's house more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall there an enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? You've been living in this rebellion for years that I've helped facilitate. We've been living in this rebellion for years. Yeah. That has been facilitated, that's been accepted, and I've taught you and I've fostered you to appreciate the favor that is deceitful instead of the affection of God, which is sure forever. Instead of the fear of God, what's the word? Favor is deceitful, beauty is vain, but a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. I've stolen your praise from you because I've allowed you to appreciate the favor that is deceitful. And such, give her the fruit of her hands. I've stolen the fruit of your hands from you. And you've been satisfied not to have it. You've been satisfied to be a fruitless church. You've been satisfied to be fed through deceit and vanity instead of secure in the fear of the Lord that produces a wisdom beyond, that produces the beauty that they're highly favoring in the first place. But not anymore. See, Mordecai's standing up. This is now no longer the issue of, am I in a dangerous place? We've got the old enemy come back. The old enemy that we didn't kill when we should have. Right. The old sin, the old death that was not put to death when it should have been put to death, but was because Saul valued his relationship with the Amalekite king and valued everything that he could get from his household more than the righteousness of God, and getting rid of anybody who would dare limit the zeal for holiness. And so the promise to get rid of the Amalekites was made true. We know very little about them today, other than we know the fact they were very brutal, might makes right, no morals people. We know that little bit about them, and the only reason we know about them is because we've been commanded to remember to forget them. They were wiped completely off the face of time, and we know just enough about them to remember to forget them. We've just enough to remember that there was an enemy this bad. And our church, the church has just lived with it, lived underneath it, allowed it to limit that zeal and passion for the holiness and righteousness of God, just by planting this doubt here, this accusation there, this turmoil here, this infighting there, and accepting the counterfeit grace instead of the grace that builds and produces a sure foundation and strengthens the relationship between you and your husbandman, and makes you not the object of lust of the world wanting to take from you, but the object of knowing, this is what happens when the glory of God is manifest in a person's life. I don't want to take what God has given you. I want to know the God that has manifested His glory on you that way. I want Him to manifest His glory on me this way. Because everybody would love watching the movie 300 and those Spartans defeating the Battle of Thermopylae and that defeating all of those Persians, because everybody looks up to the powerful warrior. But when it comes down to being that for yourself, we'd rather just let somebody else fight our battle. We would rather just back up and accept all of the deceitful favor in our own life and live this life of ease, even though we know that living the life of ease is not only just going to lead to destruction, but is going to steal from you every good thing that God would have for you. So Mordecai's standing up. See, he already stood up to Haman. Now he's having to stand up to Esther, because Esther has been more on the side of Haman than she has been on the side of her God. Because we're going to hide this Christianity. We're going to hide the presence of God and know that I can identify that like that privately, but publicly, that's nowhere in the midst. That's just going to be hidden. That the name of Jesus is something that I can appreciate, but I'm never going to say. It might be somewhere back there in the reason of the theology, but I'm never actually going to talk about him personally. He's never, this whole idea of redemption and judgment and sin and the blood, that's not on top. That's the hidden stuff behind. That we just all acknowledge, all that stuff's there too. Counterfeit. And the height of your counterfeit, the enemy comes in to finish the job. And so the question now, like Mordecai, and amen, like Esther, even after the stand up. Church, are you going to stand up? Are you going to love your counterfeit so much that you'd be willing to die for it?
Thank you so much for joining us for this video message. We do hope it's been a blessing for you. Again, we invite you to reach out to us with specific prayer requests. We invite you to reach out to us, especially if the Lord has shown you that you are lost and you've prayed to be saved. We'd love to be a continuing blessing to you in your walk with the Lord. So please do reach out to us. We are open to emails, we're open to text messages, we're open to phone calls. And we do have a brand new location. We're excited to be in Paughtown, North Carolina, and if you are close to that area especially, we'd love to meet you in person. So please do reach out to us, and we would love to be help to you in planning your visit. And again, help us to continually reach people with these messages. If they're a blessing to you, please feel free to share them with friends, with family, with co-workers, with neighbors, with anyone who's right around you. Please do feel free to share these messages. And thank you again for listening, and may the Lord richly bless you.